The Special Education Alliance is excited to bring you our speaker tonight, Kate Mayer, with Everyone Reads PA, and her colleague, Jen Sherrick, who will track questions for Kate in the chat for us tonight.
Are you ready for me?
There you go. It's your stage now.
Thank you very much, Reba and Sandy and the rest of your group for inviting Everyone Reads PA to present to the group. My name is Kate Mayer. I am going to share something very important that the volunteers who are watching, we have a lot of volunteers, asked me to do first because I don't do it often. Please donate to ERPA. We are an all-volunteer organization. I'll get into more about what we do, but I don't want to forget to ask for money because I always forget to do that. But I want to just introduce myself first and let you know how honored I am to be here. I am a mom first. I have 5 children. I live in Eastern PA, and I am committed wholeheartedly to putting children first in whatever discussion there is, because I know how important that is as an educator. I'm a structured literacy classroom teacher. I received that accreditation after having struggled with my own children and my older children specifically in not understanding why I didn't, as an educator, know how to teach reading. So I'm a structured literacy classroom teacher. After a week, I think I will also be considered a structured literacy interventionist when I complete my OG practicum. I'm a literacy specialist, and I focus mostly on assessment, intervention, and training. Everyone Reads PA. Before we get into this, Everyone Reads PA is a nonprofit with the mission that for all children in Pennsylvania to acquire literacy skills with as little emotional impact as possible. We know as parents that the struggling to learn to read and write and communicate can be immensely impactful from an emotional standpoint. And we know that there is an evidence-based way to teach most kids to read. So that is our mission. And again, like I said, we are a not-for-profit organization completely staffed by volunteers. We have researchers, PhD education professors, parents, former school board members, attorneys. We have lots and lots of people who volunteer with us. And one of our most important things that we do is that we provide free or low cost literacy screenings to Pennsylvanians. So I don't want to get too much into what we do. I want to get into the presentation. But that is one thing that we really focus on so that we can empower families to understand their children's literacy profile and thereby access the support they need. Okay, so this presentation, I was asked by Sandy and Reba to give highlights into what we call the science of reading, which is kind of an umbrella term that's been coined to describe how literacy is taught. What does research say about reading? What is the science of reading? Well, what research says, or the evidence base says, is that we can teach almost all students to read, regardless of their unique profile. We'll get deeper into the statistics, but I know that there are some questions that have been asked already by you, those of you in the audience, about how we teach kids with more complex profiles, etc. We know that we can teach about 95% of kids to read if we use evidence-based instruction, and that's a fact. So as parents, sometimes we encounter we stress about the ability of our children to acquire skills. It might be walking, rolling over, whatever it is. But when it comes to literacy, we often are confronted with, if they struggle, this fear that they might not acquire the skills. So I want you to rest assured that if your children are presented with the right type of instruction, with the right dosage, that they most likely can acquire the skill. We also know that family environment and how we communicate with our children and how we enrich them from a language perspective is one of the most important predictors of their literacy and language success. So as family members, as parents, that is something that we do and can do, and that is very, very important. We also know that the way in which children are taught to read and write and communicate within the educational system is very, very important. And so we know there can be an impact on children, positive or negative, depending on their profiles and on the instructional approaches that are used. We also know that struggling to learn to read and write can have a significant emotional impact. And that is why those of us who are volunteers for Everyone Reads PA do what we do, because we want to avoid that significant impact. So what is this science of reading? I'm sure a lot of you have heard about this. It really is a term that was coined by groups who were advocating for appropriate instruction, intervention, curriculum within school systems. The science of, I'm going to read this to you because I think it's important, and it is a definition that took a lot of smart people a long time to create. The science of reading is a vast interdisciplinary body of scientifically based research about reading and issues related to reading and writing. This research has been conducted over the last 50 years across the world and is derived from thousands of studies conducted in multiple languages. The science of reading has culminated in a preponderance of evidence to inform how proficient reading and writing develop, why some have difficulty, and how we can most effectively assess and teach, and therefore improve student outcomes through prevention of and intervention for reading difficulties. This is the very important part. The science of reading is derived from researchers from multiple fields: cognitive psychology, communication sciences or speech and language, developmental psychology, education, special education, implementation science, another key one, linguistics, neuroscience, and school psychology. What does that all mean? It means that over 5 decades, we have been presented with a lot of research that supports what best impacts children as they learn to read and write. So we know, because lots and lots of smart researchers have done this work, what works. What happens, and what we know, is that a lot of that research, as a teacher, a lot of that research does not get into schools of education. And most of us who have been trained to teach have not encountered this information. And when I say most of us, studies show that even now, most teacher education programs do not include a lot of this information. So I can tell you, I am a teacher. I was a teacher before I had my children, and I did not know how to teach my son and later more of my kids, but I didn't know how to teach my very bright little boy to read. And it wasn't until he got to 2nd grade, when there were other things going on for him emotionally, that I realized that all the work I had done, that I had learned to do with him, was not appropriate for him, and that I had to figure out something else. So this science of reading, this information, this evidence base is very important. And I just want to let all the parents out there know, and all the teachers, that we have to be gentle, because again, and Jen is a classroom teacher, she can speak to this, but when you don't know, you really don't know. And when you've been presented with different ways to teach that might not be effective, and that's what you've been doing for a long time, it is very difficult to make that change for several reasons. 1, because you don't know a different way to do it. 2, because it's painful to know that you might not have impacted your students appropriately. And 3, it's really hard to kind of learn something new. So be gentle. Parents with the teachers who are learning this, teachers, be gentle with the parents who need their children to learn to read as soon as possible. So that's just something. And I think I said this in the beginning, when we put the kids first and we think that way, it really helps to guide the discussion. So what the science of reading is not, and this is important because there's a lot of stuff going on out there around evidence-based instruction, and I just want to be very clear. It is not a philosophy. It's not one thing. It's not an ideology. It's also not part of a political party. It's not a fad, a trend, a new idea, or a swing one way or the other. It's been the same. We know how kids learn to read. Again, it's not a political agenda. So Republicans and Democrats, we all know how kids learn to read, and it's the same way regardless of your party. Independents too. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. That being said, it's also not different for every kid. So I just want to be very clear about that. It's definitely not a program or a curriculum. So a lot of you, I even got questions about this. It is a program doesn't teach kids how to read. A trained teacher does, and a program or a curriculum that is evidence-based and aligned to the science is important to support that trained teacher. But I can't tell you what curriculum to give a kid to be, and that it's going to fix the problem or teach them to read unless I know what training that person has had who is going to be delivering it. Something that I really, that anyone who talks about evidence-based instruction or the science of reading really, we all know this once we start learning about it. Really important things is that we understand these basic underlying theoretical frameworks that help us to kind of make sense of the complexity of all of this. So learning to read and write and speak, reading and writing is more complex, but learning to read and write and speak is very complex. There are lots of things going on in our brain when we do this. And so in order to simplify this for us, teachers, parents, administrators, board members, we use some theoretical frameworks that are kind of the underpinnings of evidence-based instruction that help us to make sense of it. I'm going to explain two of them to you tonight, and then I'm going to show one other thing that helps me to kind of explain. It just made a lot of sense to me when I learned about this. I don't even know what to call it, but it's a graphic that helps to understand what number of kids learn to read a certain way. It's called the ladder of reading. So we have three different things we're going to look at. The first theoretical framework that we're going to look at is called the simple view of reading. The simple view of reading was developed in 1986. It operates under the premise that reading comprehension, which is the goal that we all have for reading, is understanding what we're reading, is made up of two things that have to happen. Decoding, or kind of what I always say to parents when I'm talking to them, the mechanics of reading, that the stuff that has to happen to get the text out, and then language comprehension, which is the understanding of the language. So we have decoding, sounding out words fluently, knowing that the symbols make sounds and go together to make words and sentences, and then language comprehension, which is something we can do with our eyes closed. That's understanding spoken language, and then what we get in the end is reading comprehension. If we have a glitch or an issue within any of these two pieces of the multiplication equation, we have less than one, right? And we know that when we multiply something with a less than one, the product is less than one, and we don't get to the end result of proficient reading comprehension. So when we talk about readers, we talk about their profiles and where they might have weaknesses. And as an educator, when I'm talking about readers, I'm looking at the data I have and the information I have about that reader, and I'm looking to see if they have weaknesses in any of these areas. So a lot of times when you're thinking about your children, the decoding piece is kind of easier to spot, at least I think for parents. unless the language comprehension, unless it's very overt, obvious, right? You can tell if your child's not sounding out words efficiently. And you can, and you can say, I know Johnny's not sounding out the word. He can't read cat. Or Johnny's reading these words all the time and he's mixing them up. Language comprehension is just, in my opinion, in my experience, harder as parents to tease out unless it's something super, super obvious. I mean, where your child can't form complete sentences. I mean, it's just, again, very obvious. Now, kids who have more complex profiles often have language comprehension deficits that are identified early on. But for other kids, sometimes this can be more subtle. Again, if we don't have the kind of decoding or word reading part of reading, we have the language comprehension piece, we don't get to reading comprehension because we're unable to read all the text to get to the comprehension piece. Same thing can be said for language comprehension. If we don't have that, but we're able to read words fluently, we still can't get to what we need to do, which is reading comprehension. This next theoretical framework is called Scarborough's reading rope. Again, this helps us to really, as educators and parents, tease out where there might be some weaknesses within a child's reading profile, literacy profile. We have the language comprehension. And by the way, these two frameworks, all based on research by the researchers, were not developed together. They're not supposed to go together, but they make sense together. And for me, explaining this to non-researchers, practitioners, it's a really good way to kind of put this all together. And it's a way for you to be able to go back tomorrow and look at these things and start to kind of try to make sense from your perspective where your child might fall, or where you might be able to ask questions about your child with relationship to their literacy development. And again, I'm going to put this stuff together all the time, but literacy in this conversation is oral language, written language, and also what we can read, the print that we can decode and make sense of. So it's not just reading. So when we think about that simple view of reading, and we have the decoding or word reading piece, and then the language comprehension piece, if you look at the top here, this breaks down language comprehension for us. There are lots and lots of things that go into this rope. And often if you're ever in a training, they might have you put together a rope so you can understand more clearly how it all fits together. But all these little strands of the rope come together in language comprehension and word recognition to make a skilled reader. On the language comprehension side, we become increasingly strategic. We start to understand how to fluidly use those skills while we're reading, and in a more automatic way to become more able to efficiently comprehend and engage with text in a fluent way from an understanding and a reading, a fluency perspective. So when we look at comprehension, language comprehension, background knowledge, that's what you're doing at home. You're sending your kids off to school with a host of background knowledge. That happens from the experiences you give them, all that talking you did when they were babies, the singing, the museum visits, the grandparents, all those things help them to understand the world. They help to give them vocabulary. Without background knowledge, reading comprehension is very difficult. We know background knowledge from the research is very predictive of someone's ability to comprehend text. Sometimes, and in a study that's called the baseball study, more predictive than their ability to read the words fluently. So this background knowledge piece is important and must be developed once your children head off to school, within the school environment, and it must be thoughtful how we develop that. Vocabulary is pretty simple. It's the breadth and depth of the vocabulary that they have. Vocabulary, not just about content or things like subjects that they're interested in, but academic vocabulary, words that are used within texts that we use in educational environments. Language structures, how sentences are formed, how they're structured, how we use them. This is very important, syntax and semantics. This is often a place where kids can break down in a subtle way that we don't obviously recognize. Verbal reasoning is the ability, and this is an area where kids sometimes we have kids who aren't able to make inferences. They're not able to make connections between ideas to make meaning from the text. Understanding some of those metaphors and similes, things like that. And then finally, just understanding of how text works, print concepts, different genres, what's informational text made of, how do we use it, all of that. So those are the pieces of language comprehension that we can kind of take apart, directly instruct on, and help to develop, and also identify if children have weaknesses in those areas, so that if they do, we can ensure that we instruct and hopefully intervene in a way that helps them get to skilled reading. I'm just gonna, language comprehension is the language comprehension has not been the focus of a lot of the discussion that has occurred over the past several years, not intentionally, but again, it's just very complex. It's also harder to tease out and teach. So again, this is coming around, and I will talk a little bit about this at the end. There's a kind of an umbrella term we use for some kids who have language comprehension deficits sometimes, but word recognition has been kind of at the forefront of a lot of the discussion when we hear about the science of reading. And word recognition, again, is the ability to fluently recognize words and sentences and read them fluently. So basically the basic foundational skills of reading. Word recognition has three components: phonological awareness. That's the ability to recognize the sounds within speech. So sentences, and it gets more complex as it goes down. Sentences, words, syllables, and having phonological awareness skills is one of the predictors or foundational skills that needs to happen in order to be a proficient reader, being able to proficiently decode. So we often look in early years when we screen kids at phonological awareness skills, and that's they are predictive or help us to understand if a child is going to struggle later. And this is stuff that you work on at home. Again, when you're singing songs, you're doing Down by the Bay, or you're playing little rhyming games, things like that. These are things that we work on at home, but we also focus on in early elementary school and with struggling readers. Decoding is really that understanding that letters have sounds, the sounds put together make words, and it's called the alphabetic principle. When we put those sounds together to make words, and we do it over and over again, we map them, and then we do what's called orthographic mapping. They become sight words, or we recognize them by sight. So right here where you see sight recognition, I just want to do full stop. That is not memorizing words. That is having the ability to put the sounds and symbols together and doing it over and over again in a way that helps you to efficiently decode and sound out words until we've mapped them and they become sight words. So we have something that is not evidence-based, is memorizing lots of lists of words, which are also called sight words sometimes, and repeating them or doing them with flashcards. I know I see this on a daily basis. Goals for sight word recognition. Johnny knew 10 at the beginning of the year. He knows 150 now. Woohoo, look at how great he is. That's not what this means. This means that the child has, or the person has developed the decoding skills and has become proficient with them so that they map and become sight words. So these two, I'm going to go back. The Simple View of Reading and Scarborough's Reading Rope are two theoretical frameworks that help us and parents too, when we begin to talk about our child's literacy development, we can always go back to them to help guide us. Before I move on, I think I want to see, because it's a lot of talking, Jen, are there any questions I should answer now, or should I keep going on to the ladder of reading?
I was grouping the questions as you were talking so that we could make sure we didn't miss any. And there are quite a few about comprehension. And the thing about the comprehension questions is, if you could click back to the simple view for a moment there. Sometimes when we're talking about comprehension, we could be talking about language comprehension, or we could be talking about the overall goal of reading comprehension. So if you want, I can just give you a broad overview of the comprehension questions.
Sure.
Many of your questions are about improving reading comprehension, reinforcing comprehension for students that have, and I apologize for looking away. I have a second screen, so I'm not looking away from everyone. How to reinforce comprehension for students with intellectual disabilities, and then some questions about programs and things to use for reading comprehension. So they're a little more specific, but I wanted to just take a second to point out that sometimes when we're using the term comprehension, and honestly, as an educator, until I had more specific training, there really was never a distinction made between language comprehension and reading comprehension being two different terms. So I wanted to just point out that some of these just have the word comprehension. So I'm not sure how you want to elaborate on those as you're going forward.
I can elaborate on that because, and we'll get deeper into it when we kind of get into what instruction looks like under the science of reading, what we look at in terms of evidence-based instruction. But really, when you're talking about comprehension, reading comprehension or language comprehension, we still need to be able to do all these things here. And for children who have comprehension deficits, it is essential, and unfortunately not always part of the plan, that language comprehension and oral language development within these realms occur. And that looks in classrooms like a lot of different things. And I'm going to be very honest, and this is not a reflection on anything that any school district is doing in like specific school districts. This is something that is much more complex to teach than word recognition, and that is not for kids who struggle, not always done in a way that's effective for them. So what parents can do is really understand their children's profile and where those weaknesses are, so that then you can find ways to support them at home, and ways to, if they have an IEP, like target goals, ask for speech language pathologists to join the conversation. But in general, when we get into the instructional things that are effective, when we talk about structured literacy, we're going to talk about structured literacy with regard to language comprehension and reading comprehension as well. But I have to say, it is a complex thing, and it is hard. And so again, as we put the children first, I just want you to remember that it's hard. And so we will give you information, and we can provide more resources. So we're going to jump into this next thing that I don't know what to call. And I have Reading Aloud down here in the corner because they've done this presentation with me before. So Reading Aloud, if you don't know, is an amazing organization that provides free, low cost, or for pay structured literacy tutors. They're Philadelphia based. So I want to shout out to them. But we're looking at something here called the ladder of reading. And this is a graphic that was created by a friend of mine. Her name is Nancy Young, and I'm going to give her book a shout out because she'll be very happy if I do. But she just wrote a new book with Jan Hasbrook, who is a researcher who focuses a lot on fluency. I recommend this book for parents and educators, and it's one of the most accessible books on literacy. And it breaks down, it has chapters on every kind of profile of student you can think of. So intellectually disabled, gifted, language comprehension deficits, decoding deficits, and it makes this kind of conversation we're having just more accessible for all of us. And I mean, I just love it. But Nancy created this ladder of reading, I believe in 2012. I'm looking at it, 2012. When I saw this for the first time, I was a parent of elementary school kids, and I was trying to grapple with the understanding how I didn't know how to teach my own kids. How did I was a teacher. How did I not know this? Why couldn't my kids learn the way they were teaching in my fancy school district where everybody seemed to be fine, right? You know, like everybody was successful. And when I encountered this, it really helped me to visualize and kind of put a framework to what kids need in terms of instruction. So when we look at this ladder of reading and writing, it tells us what percentage of kids need specific types of instruction. And so if you look, there are arrows going up and down on the right, and then there are these spokes on the ladder going up the middle, and then kind of some instructional things here right along the side. So what we know about how we need to teach kids is that up at the top here, 5 to 10% of kids, we can take this book, we can put it on their head, and they are going to learn to read and write without any explicit instruction. They are going to acquire the code, they're going to comprehend, and they are going to be able to produce writing pieces that are great. That's 5 to 10% of kids. They are also going to need enrichment because they're learning effortlessly. The next rung of this ladder is this percentage of kids who need not a lot in terms of learning to read, for decoding and learning to read, but they need explicit instruction for spelling and writing. And spelling is a more difficult skill than decoding or reading words. And that's about 35% of our kids. And so what they need within this is pieces of a structured literacy approach, which we'll get into in a bit, but not a lot. They just need that for spelling and writing. And then we have the bottom two rungs, which is, if we look on the high end, it's 60% of kids. If we look on the low end, it's 50% of kids. But they need explicit structured literacy approach to learn to read and write. And within that bottom rung, we have the lowest level, 10 to 15%, who need that not only explicit instruction, explicit systematic, diagnostic, and prescriptive instruction, but they need lots and lots of repetition. And they might even need it in smaller groups and one-on-one, or depending on their profiles. So those are the kids who typically would be kids who get an IEP. However, within our current system, we're not gonna talk that way because it's very different. And then this piece in the middle, they require the explicit code-based systematic and explicit instruction, but they don't need as much repetition. So they're going to acquire the code. So we know that, and I'm not going to be able to, and Jen might be able to tell you the actual statistic, but we know, like, when we're talking about learners in terms of repetition, like a neurotypical kid might need 10 repetitions. And a kid with a significant learning disability might need 200. So there is this variation, but this ladder of reading helps me as an educator and as a parent to understand that this is different for kids. But if you look at this, it's not different in the approach so much for most kids. It's just the dosage. The other piece that is very important is that data informs the instruction. We don't feel when we're talking about reading. We don't say, oh, it says Johnny's not reading well because he's at the 10th percentile on his benchmark, but I feel like he's going to pop soon. He's gonna get it. We use the data and from whatever system that we have to inform that we're using for data collection, and the metrics that are provided by that system to help guide us in differentiating and moving children within that instructional environment. And then I'm looking over here. They're talking a little bit about different components within a child's profile, maybe ADHD, language comprehension, different things on here that impact them as well. So what does this mean?
Kate, do you want me to jump in with statistics there
Sure.
for your repetitions? There was recently a rather heated debate on a social media platform about the statistics. And they were saying that the initial research on the exact number of repetitions is up for debate, but we do know that there are students that are going to require more repetitions. That is factual. The number of repetitions is going to vary depending on which student you're working with. So it may be different depending on what your child needs, as opposed to maybe if you have more than one child, it might look different at your own house, or compared to your niece or nephew or other kids in the class. I know it's hard not to compare, but we have to try not to do that as much as we can, because every student is different. Every situation is going to be a little bit different when it comes to learning, not learning to read, but in terms of repetition. They said that the initial source, someone had posted a cute little graphic, and one of the researchers had come out and said, like, this information is incorrect. So the numbers that everybody talks about all the time are not exactly firm, but we do know that some more repetitions are beneficial for some learners. And it kind of goes with those percentages that you have. The kids that are in the lower rungs are going to need more repetitions than the kids that are in the colors that are the lighter green. Sorry if that's a little disappointing, but I had been holding on to those numbers as well. But once you're working with the student, you're gonna like, well, obviously they didn't get it after 5, so we're gonna keep practicing.
Well, and it's really important to know that, for example, kids with intellectual disabilities can learn to read. It just takes a lot more repetition, and and we'll get into structural literacy a little more deeply, but we only have about 5% of kids who can't learn to decode and read. So what we want to see is progress. And so if you're not seeing progress, then the intervention is not working. This next slide talks about more about the numbers if you're thinking about a classroom. So this is another representation kind of what we saw. But we know that within those higher rungs, about 35% or in a classroom of 28, 9.8 students are reading proficiently. This is actually not the rungs. This is our data. This is our national data. 35% of students in our country are reading proficiently. Full stop. Doesn't matter your socioeconomic status. Like across the country on NAEP, about 35% of our students are reading proficiently or better. 65% of students are not reading proficiently. How many can learn to read? 95% of students. So we just had that conversation. If they're given explicit, systematic, and sequential instruction in foundational reading skills, the decoding piece. So when we talk about reading, we're talking about the decoding piece, the word recognition piece. We're not talking about the language comprehension piece. So I do want to be clear about that. Within a class of 28, this is where the ladder comes in. About 30% or 8.4 students can learn regardless of how they're taught. This doesn't have to do with writing or spelling. 50% or 14 students can learn with explicit, systematic, and sequential instruction in foundational skills. 4.2 students require additional time and instruction. And then the last 5% or 1.4 students are the ones who will not learn to read or decode proficiently. That's pretty special, right? If we look at that, does your classroom look like that? As a teacher, my classroom did not look like that. I did not believe that. I did not know that. So I just want to set the stage for all of us, parents, educators, administrators, school board members. all kids in our district should be reading, except for a few. And so we should not be making excuses if they're not. We should be figuring out what we, as the adults, can do to support them. Okay, so what is structured literacy? We've heard a lot about that. Again, it's going to have components that we talked about, these components. It's going to focus on phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, phonics and word recognition, the decoding piece, fluency, vocabulary, listening and reading comprehension, and writing. Okay, so we're going to explicitly focus on and teach those things in a systematic, cumulative, sequential, explicit, and diagnostic way. So as an educator, I should be able to answer to you how I will sit, where on a scope and sequence my students are in terms of their writing instruction, their reading comprehension instruction, their vocabulary instruction. It should be a plan that I know that is not only tied to my classroom, but tied to the greater school. And I should be able to articulate and assess and know where my student is in all these areas. We hear a lot about this structured literacy when it comes to word reading. Many of you are probably familiar with this. If you hear about programs or methodologies like Wilson or Orton Gillingham, they are structured literacy programs and methodologies. The big story is that that's structured literacy is not only around word reading and spelling. It is across all strands of literacy and should be part of a comprehensive literacy program within a school district or a classroom or a home if you're a homeschooler or, now, does that mean that there might not be a focus? So a kid might need word reading instruction and your tutor might only be working on that. Yes, that can happen. But in general, if a child is identified as needing structured literacy, and all, we'll get into this, kids benefit from it. We would not want to be giving them a less structured approach to instruction. In Pennsylvania, in October of 2022, and I'm not going to click on this, I will share the file with the group, so you can click on it. The PA structured literacy competencies were passed by the legislature, and they were put into place. By, I believe, this school year, all school districts should have trained their teachers in these structured literacy competencies. We have an amazing free resource from PD, Pennsylvania Department of Education, and from Patton. And I just do want to apologize because I think in about 2 seconds, my kids are going to start screaming and I might not be able to stop it. So if you hear it, please forgive me. But the PA structured literacy competencies were passed and should be implemented. Now, Pennsylvania is a local control state. These competencies, while they've been legislated, there is no enforcement. So I highly recommend that you review them, understand them. If you want to understand them even more, you can explore the International Dyslexia Association knowledge and practice standards on which these are based. And there's a little more explanation in there about them for you to understand. But the big deal is systematic, cumulative, sequential, explicit, and diagnostic, meaning we are looking at the needs of children. We are differentiating for those needs. We are following the scope and sequence or the plan to provide them with that instruction. And that therefore we are developing their literacy skills in a way that we know will get them to proficiency. What does this all mean? Structured literacy is essential for many and harmful for none. So an example I give here is I have a good friend, a colleague. She's got 3 kids. One is like superstar student graduating from high school. And that student didn't need structured literacy to learn to read. The other 2 have dyslexia. Okay. But when we get into the conversation and that mom didn't know that the younger 2 had dyslexia, but she would say, oh, let's just call this older kid Bobby. Bobby just learned to read. When you have the conversation and you start to talk about Bobby, you realize Bobby can't spell very well. And Bobby was able to acquire all these things, but Bobby would have really benefited from having explicit instruction in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade, because Bobby would have acquired the encoding or spelling skills that they don't have now, or maybe they've had to muddle along to acquire. So essential for many, harmful for none. A lot of times you will hear, oh, it's so boring. It's so boring. The kids hate it. We need to do more exploratory learning. When we're talking about foundational skills, writing skills, we need to explicitly teach that. And Bobby's mom just texted me and said, Bobby has no grammar skills either. Just saying. So when we dig into this, we really, the explicit instruction really is beneficial. And when you're little and you're getting it, you're not complaining. We know what good reading looks like. Early intervention, being diagnostic and prescriptive, is so important. Screening, so important when kids are younger, because early intervention is 4 times more effective. I always use my kids because it's easier for me to do that, and the younger ones still don't care. I have twins who are 8, and I have an 18-year-old. One of my twins is exactly the same profile as my 18-year-old. My twin goes to a school that teaches structured literacy in the regular ed classroom. My 18-year-old went to a Lucy Calkins Readers Workshop elementary school. They have the same intellect, they have the same family, they have the same exposure, all the things. This one was identified with dyslexia. This one is a proficient reader and will never, ever have the same emotional impact as this one. So what I didn't know for the first, 3 years of school was impactful on my child, because I was not able to intervene early. For the other one, I didn't even have to intervene because he got the right instruction. So and that's anecdotal. It's also research-based. We know if we target a kid in kindergarten and we don't wait for them to fail, that the impact is exponentially, it's just faster, it's easier, and less stressful for the child. We can target intervention to hit those strands of literacy. We can be diagnostic and prescriptive. And what you guys do at home, what all of you do at home, is so important, but it is not enough. It has to happen in school. Okay, I know we're kind of getting have a little timing issue, but I do want to get into how do I know if my child is struggling early elementary? And I'm going to breeze through these pretty quickly, but the most important thing, no matter what grade, is trust your gut. So if you feel like there's a problem, hold on one second. I'm really sorry. Sorry about that. If you think there's a problem, a research study came out, I believe, at the end of 2023 that said that parent instinct, or parents' feeling about their child's reading difficulties, was just as effective as early screening or screening. So trust your gut. Don't let someone say, again, this is a statement that a lot of parents who I worked with early on heard a lot. Johnny's going to pop. Don't worry, Mrs. Mayer. He'll be fine. Just read to him more at home and it'll be all good. That first of all, reading at home is really important, but it's not going to teach him how to read. And if you're concerned, it is probable that there is something that should happen in order to support the reading development. Struggling with rhyming words, identifying the first sound of a word, that's going to be something that is as a red flag for phonemic awareness issues. Remembering new words, breaking words into sounds or chunks, blending sounds together to make a word. Those are phonological awareness or phonemic awareness things, but also remembering words could be a language comprehension thing. word recall, if they call something the thingamajiggy all the time, or if you know your child has heard this word 14 times and they can't remember what to call this, you know, like you've told them, that can be a red flag. Do they guess or use picture clues to read instead of sounding out words? That's a red flag for difficulties or a red flag for misaligned instruction. So two different things, but we don't want little kids who are learning to read guessing at words, using picture clues or context to tell us what those simple words are. Do they fight with you when you want them to read aloud? Little kids like to read. Little kids love to share what they learned in school. It is rare that you have a kid fight about sharing what they learned in school unless it's hard. Okay, so behavior is indicative of need. So I just want you to remember that. Sight words, the, it, as, the, you know, all of those little words. Are they reading them differently every time? Are they reading along and skipping them? Do they say the for is or at? That's a red flag, a big one. Are they able to write by the end of kindergarten? Are they using the sounds of words to spell? It might not be correct, but are they appropriately writing the sounds? Okay, how about when they're older? Again, trust your gut. Do they fight about going to school? Again, kids like to go to school. I mean, school refusal can be indicative of a lot of things, but in my experience working with a lot of kids, frequently it is about something going on at school that's difficult or upsetting. And reading struggles can be very, very upsetting and very difficult for kids to articulate their feelings around that. Again, oral reading fluency should not be slow. We should not hear someone explaining away why a kid reads slowly. Oral reading fluency can be developed just like word recognition, decoding, and it should be worked on because slow readers have difficulty comprehending. And again, it's something we can teach. So you guys probably have benchmarks. If you hear someone explaining that Bobby's oral reading fluency is in the 14th percentile, but don't worry, they're accurate. That's a red flag and something to question. Writing becomes the canary in the coal mine. If someone's refusing to write, yes, there could be occupational therapy issues, but in general, writing's an apex skill. We're not going to get into that tonight. It requires all these different things. If it's difficult, there's probably something going on the language kind of ability to read and write side. Slower to answer questions about what they read. Do they understand what they read? Can they infer? Those are things that are also issues. And then one thing that I always like to tell parents is, because something that happens a lot, is that attention is often the go-to. And we have squirrely whirly kids. I've got them, one of them looking at me right now in the eyes while I'm doing this. But attention is often used as a reason for kids who are not reading or writing. Kids with attention issues can learn to read and write with the right instruction. Absolutely. And attention issues can sometimes, I'm not going to say often, but in my experience, and I get a lot of kids with language-based learning disabilities, can be related to language as well. So you always want to look at that language comprehension, that language processing piece, and make sure that attention is not used as the reason why a child is not learning to read and write. I'm not going to dig into this too much. We've already been through this, but literacy challenges can be on all those strands. It's not just dyslexia. One thing that I don't think I put in this presentation that I do want to talk about is the umbrella term of dyslexia has to do with the word reading side. The umbrella term of developmental language disorder, or DLD, has to do with the language comprehension side, the expressive language, receptive language, social pragmatic language, all of those things. Those are two. If you have a child who's struggling on the language comprehension side and you are not sure what's going on, I do recommend learning more about developmental language disorder, which is new to the theater. It's new to the world. It's not talked about a lot. And as educators, we don't know a lot about it. Language comprehension challenges can have impact outside of the academic world, socially, emotionally, peer relationships, all sorts of things. Okay, how much time do we have? Because I do want to talk about,
We are at 8 o'clock right now.
so one of the things that I think on our agenda was to kind of like tease out how can you hold on one second, everyone? I'm really, really sorry. You have to go away. I'm speaking now. Sorry. How to tease out how your kid's doing. Okay. This is something that's really, really important. I would say from kindergarten through 8th grade, kindergarten through 6th grade, typically school districts have, even school districts who are not saying they're doing the science of reading or evidence-based reading instruction, they typically have screeners in place, at least in Pennsylvania. I'm just saying, and I believe the district that we're talking to now has screeners in place. Universal screeners are used to determine who is at risk for reading failure, okay? They're short, they're done 3 times a year usually, sometimes twice a year. And they can be done kindergarten through 8th grade. Typically in high achieving districts, they don't tend to stretch them out to 8th grade, just honestly. But they are there for parents and educators, and parents should be receiving the results of these universal screeners 3 times a year. We know from the evidence base, the science of reading, that parents and educators working together and talking together about screening data and where the children are is effective and impactful on reading development. So if you don't get these just automatically, you can absolutely ask your teacher for the screeners. You can ask them for the percentiles of where your child falls. One thing that's very important about screeners is that they are not IQ tests. They are not achievement tests. They are not made on a bell curve. Benchmark is the lowest denominator. If your child is not at benchmark, they can be. It's not like half the kids have to be under benchmark. The goal is to get everyone at benchmark. Benchmark is predictive of literacy success. So I'm working in a district now where 50% of the students are not at benchmark. It's a high achieving district, at least seemingly high achieving. The district doesn't understand the science of reading. And I do want to shout out to Methacton, who are working really hard using Senator Moose Science of Reading grant and participating in professional development for their administrators and audits. It's an amazing, not very common in Eastern PA thing, but I want to shout out to that. But in this district, the administrators have said to me, 50% of kids is good. 50% of the top, 50% of the bottom. And the real big deal is that no, everybody, you know, if we have 50% of kids who are not at benchmark, that means we have 50% of kids who are probably not going to be successful readers. So this universal screener is used to help guide instructional choices for students so that schools know where to target that more intensive structured literacy instruction. They also are used to determine student progress. If you have a child who's being pulled out for reading intervention, or if you're hearing that your child has a reading struggle, these universal screeners or some sort of progress monitoring tool that is norm reference should be used to measure their progress. Different brands of screeners, Acadience, Aimsweb Plus, Early Bird, Dibbles, Maps, and iReady. In my opinion, Maps and iReady, and I use these tools a lot, are not the best for helping us make instructional decisions. But we can dig into that later. These all have norms. They tell us the risk. I've kind of already have gone through this, so I'm not going to dig into this too much. But really important progress monitoring. Always, if your child's getting intervention, you want, if they're in a lower tier, meaning more intensive, you want it weekly. Progress monitoring, you should see graphs that are going up, not like this. Growth doesn't mean progress. Okay, so growth on A screener, if it's being used as a progress monitoring tool, does not mean that it's enough progress or appropriate progress, and response to intervention is positive. Okay, kids getting any instruction should be making some sort of growth, right? Getting more time, whatever. So it's very important, and that's what we do. We help parents understand this. Here's an example. This is an old. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but this is an old parent report from Acadians. It's a little fancier now, but if you notice here, this report not only gives us the national percentile and the benchmark status, but it gives us a graph. If this first sound fluency isn't measured at the end of the year, so I don't have 3 data points. This is a kindergarten. After kindergarten, you're going to get many measures that are 3 points in a row, beginning, middle, and end. And you can see this child was going up on their first sound fluency, but then on their phoneme segmentation went down. And here, although they went up in their nonsense word fluency, correct letter sounds, they didn't move for their percentile, meaning they weren't making appropriate growth. This child also has progress monitoring, but I don't have that. Here's a little bit easier image here. You should all be getting these if your children are in kindergarten through in my district, they only do kindergarten through 4th grade, which isn't recommended, but most districts at least do through 6th grade. Again, these are composite scores, which your child will get. A composite score could be above benchmark, and you could still have a child with a need, because if you look at this, the nonsense word fluency is telling us their decoding skills. The phoneme segmentation is telling us their phonemic awareness skills. We might see difficulties in one or both, and it's important to understand that. We go back to those theoretical frameworks to help us, that reading rope to help us understand this. The other area where we will see screening as kids get older, not in kindergarten, is in reading comprehension. That doesn't mean that if a kid passes a reading comprehension screener, that they don't have reading comprehension difficulties, or if a child fails a reading comprehension screener, that they might not have very strong listening comprehension skills. Again, just screeners, not a diagnostic tool. Okay, so next, this is an image I want you to see because it's important to think about. Again, theoretical frameworks. We have different types of struggling readers. We have struggling readers who have what we call mixed reading difficulties. That's language comprehension and word recognition difficulties. We have kids with only specific comprehension difficulties and strong word recognition skills. We call them hyperlexic kids. Sometimes autistic kids are identified with hyperlexia, where they're really able to decode and read fluently, but they cannot, they're not able to effortlessly understand or comprehend the text. Then we have dyslexic kids, solely dyslexic kids who have trouble with that word recognition piece. We have these kids in the middle who seem like they're good. We call them compensators. Those are kids who use those memorization skills, etc., but still struggle and need explicit instruction. And then we have kids who are just adequate or good readers. What do you do if you're concerned? Understand the data, ask for data. We have lots of resources we'll give at the end. Establish relationships. Understand that your educators don't always know. Be respectful, but advocate for your child. Bring in data and bring in help. And then questions to ask your child's school. We do have a resource on our at the end of this presentation that you can click on that gives you some questions to ask about instruction, in intervention processes, evaluation procedures. And I know that there are going to be questions about curriculum. So I didn't put any of this in the presentation because I'm hesitant to do that. I think I said this at the beginning. Trained educators are what we need. Evidence-based curricula is important as well. The Reading League is an organization that I highly recommend you learning more about. Again, they're in the resource guide. They have a website called The Compass. On May 1st, the Compass is going to come out with some curriculum information. So about some big box curricula. It's not going to be, this is good, this is bad. It's going to give you information from the evidence base. They've done a lot of time working with publishers and investigating, and they will, that will be helpful. I will tell you, and I feel very confident in telling you a couple things. Fontes and Pinnell and leveled reading and Fontes and Pinnell BAS assessments, which give you a level like A, B, C, D through, not evidence-based. No more effective than tossing a coin. So you could have a child who is, has a reading disability, who is plugging along on their F&P, we call Fontes and Pinnell. It might have another name. There's a curriculum called Wonders that has leveled reading assessments within it that are similar. Same thing. We call them reading inventories. They are not effective tools in identifying a student's level. Okay, so I feel comfortable from the evidence base in stating that. I also feel comfortable and confident in stating that Lucy Calkins, who is a, what do I call her? Who ran a program called the Teachers College Readers and Writers, not workshop, that's her curriculum. Her curricula are not evidence-based. So readers workshop, writers workshop. If you think about it, anything that's kind of not structured and doesn't have a specific plan, and that you can't articulate what a kid is learning, when they're learning it, what they need to know for mastery of it, what should it look like in the end, that's something that should guide you. But those things, those two things, I feel very confident in saying not evidence-based. If you have a child who requires on that ladder of reading any level of structured literacy, those things should not be used. I mean, they shouldn't be used. Lucy Calkins can be used for some of the kids who don't require structured literacy, and they'll be fine. But for kids who require any level of that, they can be harmful. So let me see what else. Everyone Reads PA, we're here. We do literacy advocacy for families, educators, and community organizations. We do free, low-cost literacy screenings using the Early Bird Screener for kindergarten through 2nd grade.
And you did have a question about that, actually,
Oh,
while you're
really?
talking about
Okay.
testing. What kinds of testing would you use to identify dyslexia? So, and I knew that you would mention Early Bird Screener, so I was hoping we could connect those when it came up.
Yeah, so we do not, what I would say to all parents is, when it comes to literacy, I am always less interested in diagnoses and more interested in knowing where a child's weaknesses are, so I can target instruction and get them what they need immediately. A dyslexia identification doesn't mean we teach a child differently. If your child is cognitively impaired, dyslexic, has developmental language, or if they're struggling with word reading, acquiring the skills, word reading skills, they need structured literacy. They need explicit systematic instruction at some level of intensity or dosage in some grouping. So a kid with a significant need needs one-on-one. And it doesn't matter if they have a dyslexia identification. Now, I know the law, due process, all this special education stuff that we live within, unfortunately, is not evidence-based. So decisions in courts are not made based on all this stuff we're talking about. It does help. And if a child has a dyslexia identification, it can help maybe get them what they need. But I just want to throw that out there. Now, what do we use to identify dyslexia? I'm not a neuropsychologist. However, I have been trained to assess students and identify if they have profiles that align with a dyslexic profile. And we would use things like the screeners that you've seen. We use different assessments to to tease out phonological awareness difficulties. We use other assessments to tease out decoding difficulties within the scope and sequence of skills you need to acquire to decode. So what patterns do they know? What can they spell? What can they read fluently? We also look at some things called, sometimes look at rapid automatic naming, which is a skill. What we use for our organization to kind of screen kids who might be at risk for dyslexia when they're little is the Early Bird Screener. And that is validated and was created by Nadine Gabb and her team. She's a brain scientist, neuroscientist. And we use that so that parents can know and intervene early. Again, you might have a kid who's identified at risk on that with a dyslexia flag, but they get the right instruction. I might have one myself. And they get the right instruction, and later on they don't have that profile. So there's not a specific test, and there can be bad assessments, and sometimes, often, school district assessments don't identify it. But we can dig into it a little more. We can use our screeners to help us identify if a kid is at risk. Again, that's a little more complex, but if you have a child who has is below benchmark on your DIBELS or your Acadience or your AIMSweb screeners, you would look at where they are below benchmark, and that could help guide you in doing further assessment. Jen, any other questions?
Yes, we do have a few others. They're not about testing. Would you like to go into the other subjects at this point?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm sorry, I feel like I talked a really long time.
I
But
was
are
trying to
still
determine if they had a screener, if there was a particular one that would be helpful to talk about in their district. I didn't know if you knew.
I'm pretty sure that you guys use Acadience is what
Okay.
I remember from the work I've done, but that might have been a year ago that so I'm not sure if Reba or Sandy know what screeners are used.
I was messaging Sandy on a direct message to see if
And
she knew.
I actually, I mean, I could probably dig in because
It's okay. I have some experience with some screener, but mine is more specific to DIBELS Next and DIBELS 8. So I could talk about that if that was what they used. But if Acadience is
they're
similar,
very
but not.
so DIBELS, Acadience, and AIMSweb are all very similar, and then they assess
I mean, if you want, I can talk a little bit about that because we've been a DIBELS school for, I don't know, like 14 years at least. If that would be helpful, and if not, I don't have to.
No, you can share that for sure. And
I
just
actually
it's similar to Acadience. So if you have Acadience, it will relate.
And I think DIBELS Next, which we had up until about 2 years ago, is Acadience now anyway. So, and I just did my end of year DIBELS today, so I'm very fresh on the content. When you do your screener, every student is to be screened, and currently Pennsylvania does not have a screener in place. We're still working on that legislation. So small plug for contact your state representative and let them know that they need to pass that literacy bill so that every student in the state can be screened. But we screen all the students, and then we look at the data overall, and then we look at the different colors, which in DIBELS 8 and DIBELS Next, there's blue, green, yellow, and red. I am not positive if Acadience has blue. I would venture to guess that they do because DIBELS Next also had blue. They added it for fun one time and didn't tell us, so that was an adventure. But the scores are based on their research, and all of the information should be accessible to parents. Your school should be sending it home if they have a screener. We send our scores home 3 times a year. It's done beginning, middle, and end. The nice thing about these types of screeners is that they are minimal interruptions to classroom instructional time. So they're not taking away from your trained teacher teaching your child, and your child's not missing large amounts of instruction. And I teach kindergarten, so it took maybe 8 minutes to do one student, and that includes the directions. There were 4 assessments that I did today, and each one is 1 minute total for the assessment itself. We do the things that Kate has mentioned earlier, the PSF, which is sounds, the nonsense words, things like that. We also do the rapid letter naming as well, and then we do whole word reading too. So, after you get all of your scores in, you look at your complete data profile for your classroom, as well as, in my district, we have 2 schools. So we look at our individual school and then our overall grade levels, which you want to just be aware of. And then looking at how many kids you have in red and yellow and so on. So you can see if your instruction is working. The data itself is a reflection on if your instruction is working. And if you notice that the scores, as the educator, the scores are not improving, that means that your instruction isn't working. It doesn't indicate that anything's wrong with your child. So try to keep that in mind as you're looking at data. There's nothing wrong with your kid. Every kid is an amazing person, and we want to teach them all. That's our job as an educator, to teach your child. And so when we progress monitor, we do, at my district, we're required to progress monitor students that are red every week and students that are yellow every other week. That may vary based on expectations from administrators in your school district. But if I don't see that my data is moving in an upward projection, that means that my instruction is not reaching my students and I need to reevaluate what I'm doing. It doesn't mean that something's wrong with the student. That's a major mind shift for educators, and training helps with that. We had a little thing in the chat a few minutes ago. The more training your educators have, the better they understand their impact and their value in the classroom. And a lot of the previous training that we had, and I think Katie, you could probably speak to this as well. A lot of our previous training as educators, it was very teacher centric in terms of, well, I'm doing everything perfectly. It must be something someone else has done. And it's really hasn't shifted to say that things that go on in the classroom aren't, my fault, but more reflective as in how can I help improve the situation? And that's the whole point of the screener. And just because your child's red does not mean that they're dyslexic or they have a learning disability. It just identifies, as Kate earlier mentioned, that they might need some type of intervention to support them. And if you provide the correct interventions, then a student can become a successful reader. It doesn't necessarily mean they need an IEP or a specialized learning plan. And that's where your tiers would come in if you use MTSS, which again is also not required by our state, but in most cases, you would provide some sort of intervention to support readers who need a little more extra support. And in an ideal situation, you will see those scores improve, which is happening in my district. It doesn't mean that, a miracle is going to happen overnight. We talked about those kids who are going to need those extra repetitions. I have those kids in my class this year. And, I had a kid at mid-year who was zeros, still zeros. And we screened this week and we went from 0 to 22. And it's amazing for a kindergartner to be able to do that. We didn't know that that was possible, but we provided some extra support. So just because it's hard today doesn't mean it's going to be the same hard tomorrow. So I know some days it can be difficult, but hold on to hope and keep practicing. It doesn't mean that just because you didn't get it today doesn't mean you won't get it next week. Every step is progress, and steps might be smaller and they might take more, but keep practicing and we'll get there.
And Jen, thank you for sharing that. You brought something up that I forgot to mention. I did not put this into the presentation because I knew it was going to be long. But something there at the beginning, we talked about all those different areas that came together to kind of inform what we call the science of reading. And one of them was implementation science. MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, are an evidence-based way to have healthy literacy systems. In Pennsylvania, they are not required. However, we have an enormous amount of free resources, not only for MTSS, but structured literacy MTSS systems through our patent system. School districts can sign up for free audits from patent and have free coaching from patent to align their systems. One thing that I will say is that if you don't have an MTSS system, it is most likely that lots of kids are getting missed. While kids grow at different rates, again, we have these, any healthy literacy system should have an effective screening system. Those tools that we talked about, Acadian, Dibbles, AimsWeb, Early Bird, they are used within these systems for the grown-ups to see, not just the administration, but the board members, I wish the state, to see how healthy the systems are. And we know that in a tiered system where we're looking at efficacy of instruction, even, I guess a tiered system, when we're talking about those screeners, if we have more than 20% of our students who are below benchmark in the red, actually probably in the below benchmark, we know that it's not an effective aligned system, and that there's work to do for the grown-ups in the system. So this is a process, like I said, it's something that none of us learned in our teacher training or our administrator training. I went back to get my master's again in reading science that I'm in the middle of right now, because I knew that I didn't have this experience. And although I had spent a lot of time learning it in lots of different ways, I wanted that credential, and it was very hard to find a program, and it is not in Pennsylvania. In closing, I want to, and Sandy and Reba, let me know if you have any other questions, but I do want to just show that on this presentation, we will share this with Sandy and Reba to hand out. These are all links, okay? There are many resources. There are too many resources for me to share. I think all the links still work. I did check through them. I highly recommend listening to this podcast, Sold a Story, but Emily Hanford also has other podcasts. And then the framework and guidelines. Right here are the universities in Pennsylvania that do have some programs aligned to structured literacy. And then resources for educators. And the Science of Reading Implementation Guide is an amazing resource for educators. And I think that's it. I don't know if you guys have anything else, Reba and Sandy, that you want to ask. I just want to thank you all for coming. I feel like I talked way too much. I know that those of you who have kids who might have more complex profiles might be asking yourself about programs, how to support them. And I just want to reiterate that we teach kids to read the same way if we're using evidence-based instruction. It should not be a feeling-based approach. And we should be monitoring progress of the students and keeping track of that with an evidence-based tool. So I have a friend in my school district who has a child who has Down syndrome, who has been effectively learning to decode and read with evidence-based instruction. And it took a lot of advocacy on her part, but I just want to reiterate, and I feel like I know that there's a lot of stress sometimes when you have a kid with complex needs, and it feels like there are no answers, but the evidence base exists for them too. And they can learn to decode as well. And so I hope this was helpful.
Can you leave the chat open for just a few minutes?
Sure. And are you
I
gonna
just-
contact them? Yep. And we
I
can,
just am looking up a question answer.
okay, sure.
Also, I think we have a link to a feedback form that we'll be throwing in there too. If everybody could just click on that and fill out their feedback.
And I have to ask to donate again. I just got a text.
Absolutely.
Please donate. Every penny helps.
Can we put a link to that in the chat too so people can click?
Sure, I
That
can
don't
put
know
that.
how to do the fancy, make
It's
the computer do that
Jen,
thing?
it's bit.ly// capital ERPA, capital D. I can text it to you if you want.
If you go to the website too, it's like
Yeah,
right on
it's
your
on the
top
website.
bar, it says
Yep.
donate, there's a
Yeah,
donate
yeah.
button.
Says
So that
donate.
might just be easier. Yeah.
I think so.
All right.
I really appreciate it. I know it's late at night. I might have kids hanging from the ceiling upstairs and grumpy teenagers. But I really appreciate it. And Reba, and Sandy, I will send you the presentation.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Okay, Sandy, are you
Reba,
gonna put,
Before you
go ahead.
close, I do see
Yes.
another question from Namir. The 1%, will they never read or just be a certain school grade level?
So Namir, I'm not super familiar with the research about the 1%, but it is my understanding that those are kids who do not achieve the ability to decode. Now I think, research is, I don't know what that research comes from, where those kids come from, but I also don't know I don't think that means they won't understand. I think that specific metric is around who is going to learn to decode. But I could be wrong, and we can try to find more information for you.
Okay. Unless there's any more questions, I can just do my little closing spiel if we're ready for that.
Oh, I think I have the answer that we were looking for.
Go
So
ahead.
I know there are several people, this is about the oral reading fluency. There's several well-recognized researchers that have information on this. I personally refer to Hasbrook and Tyndall's data when I am looking at fluency, and they have norms for grades 1 through 6. So I
But
believe that,
every program has norms that you should.
yeah,
So like Dibbles, Acadian.
they just wanted to know how long you should benchmark reading fluency. I can't, my friend that works for Dibbles, she lives on the West Coast, so we live different lives usually. And sometimes our stars align, but sometimes they don't. And I did ask her what grade they go up to. I know I can see up to 3rd grade for oral reading fluency.
It goes up to 8th grade. They all
I know
go,
does there oral reading fluency in 8th grade too?
so all of them, well, not early bird, but most of them go up it starts in 1st to 8th for oral reading fluency. And the deal is typically in my experience, schools who have high need, they keep assessing fluency because it is a metric they use. I live in a school district where they believe that they don't have as much need, and they don't in general. So they only go to 4th grade. Now they miss a lot of kids. That being said, if you have a healthy system that you've created, maybe going to 8th grade is not necessary, but at this point, I don't know many systems that are,
We only go to 2nd grade, if that makes you feel any better.
yeah. So no.
I mean, worse, better.
Yeah, no,
subjectively
it should
speaking.
definitely be happening, to middle
yeah.
school, so, and each system, so Acadians, if you say, look at the benchmarks, you can say Acadians benchmarks and see their benchmark grid and what it looks like. You can say Dibbles benchmark, see their grid.
And I have a custom made grid that I make I'm everyone's favorite, by the way, if you haven't picked that up, everyone. I made like a custom grid for my parents because again, I teach kindergarten, so I'm always teaching my parents how to kind of get access to the system. Many parents are from the generation of whole language and balanced literacy. So when they want to help their child or they don't want their child to relive any school trauma that they had, I have to reteach them how phonics works and how to decode because they didn't learn. I didn't learn until like 2 years ago, in all honesty. So I'm teaching them too. So all of my materials for my parents are very simplified and easy to access, highlighted, all the scores are there for them. And I also wanted to say, if there's any parents that are still on, I was messaging with Jamie, who said that your district's going to be shifting to Dibbles next year. Hopefully she doesn't mind me saying this, but when we switched from Next to Dibbles 8, which is going to be a similar shift for you, we experienced a dramatic drop in our scores. And it is expected, and it can be a little bit shocking. So try not to panic, everybody. It does happen. And then as you sort of understand the expectations of the new program, and you don't teach to the test because that's not how it works, but you improve your instruction so that your students become better readers, and then your scores improve because your kids are reading, not because you're teaching to the test, but because your teachers are better at teaching, and then your kids are better at reading, which is what has happened in our school district. So the first round of testing, though, I mean, people were panicking. Everyone was panicking. Everyone was sweating out the first parent conference to explain those scores. So as you're going through that process, just keep that in the back of your mind that there is a curve. There's definitely a learning curve. The expectations are slightly different. So try not to panic completely. Like it'll be okay. Just work together to get that training aligned.
And Jen, just to clarify, I don't think there is a universal screener right now. I think that some, like the schools use different screeners in district. So just so parents know, you might not have screeners. But I just want to again reiterate, thank you all for coming. And please reach out to us if you have any questions. Do bear with Everyone Reads PA, as we are it's a crazy time of year and everyone has lots of needs at the end of the school year. Again, thank you very much for your time.
And I dropped the link for you into the
Awesome.
chat.
Thank you.
And it seems there's one more question in here.
Okay.
It says, there seems to be a lot of emphasis on fluency. Is there a systematic way of teaching reading comprehension?
So that is a good question. There isn't, just to clarify, fluency is one of the most predictive measures of reading comprehension success. And it is a short measure, 1 minute, maybe 3 minutes, depending on the test, because you might have to do 3. So the importance of fluency is, it is very important. Is there a systematic way to teach comprehension? So if you go back to that reading rope, where we saw the different strands of language comprehension. We need a program, a curriculum, or a plan, comprehensive plan, grade to grade, that talks about how background knowledge is going to be developed. Okay, so we hopefully would get that within a curriculum so that teachers aren't required to do that themselves. It's a lot of planning. We also need to have the same thing for vocabulary, sentence structure, writing, sentence level, paragraph level, essay level, and then oral language development. And there is a systematic way to present the information to students, a structured literacy approach using routines that are the same. So we have oral language routines within a classroom. We have vocabulary routines. We have read aloud routines. We have writing routines. They are systematic and explicit in that they happen the same way, so that the cognitive load for students is not on figuring out what's going on, but really figuring out whatever it is that we're trying to teach them. It's complex. It is not part of most curricula, or it might be. I'll give you an example, and I don't know the curriculum your district uses, but I know Wonders because it's what my children's district uses. It is not a structured literacy curriculum. It is not. Full stop. Do they have some good pieces? Yes. They have classroom routines in a book that says classroom routines. Most teachers who teach Wonders don't know it exists. So if they embed them, or if they buy another thing to put on top of Wonders, it can become an explicit, systematic way of instruction, because it does have the content within it, but it doesn't have those routines. So again, whoever asked that question, it's complex. If you have a child who has a reading comprehension deficit, there are there's one thing I really love. It's called literacy.io. It's a training for teachers. And it teaches teachers how to deliver any read aloud. That can be social studies, science, English, literature, whatever, in the same way. And then teaches them how to teach the students. And I think it's like 1st through 6th, 8th grade, how to write in response to what has been read. And that develops the comprehension. It's very evidence-based, very effective. It is hard to implement as a teacher because it's new, but it is a very effective program for special ed and general ed, English language learners. It's not a program. It's a framework. But again, it's hard. So I can't give you an answer. I will say one thing that's often used that is not evidence-based is visualizing and verbalizing. It's a Lindamood Bell program. It is not evidence-based. There's an evidence-based program that Lindamood Bell offers, but visualizing and verbalizing is not one of them. So again, we always want programs because it's easier for us to say, special ed team, please use this program. But really you need a very good speech language pathologist and someone who's well-versed in this literacy piece to put together, an approach that includes teaching comprehension strategies, sentence structure, vocabulary, background knowledge, all of that. And it's not an easy answer. But there are lots of resources on comprehension, and I highly recommend if you have a child who is struggling with comprehension that you do try to learn as much as you can because it will help you support your child as well. Oral language is a key for reading comprehension. So oral language development, modeling, all of those things for them is also important. But it's not like, hey, put the program on and then they got it. It's just more complex. Any more questions, Reba and Sandy?
No, I think that Jen answered the last question I saw.
And then, Reba, there was one, but I think maybe that answered it too, that someone had asked, if I'm a non-teacher, how can I help children learn to read in a professional setting? And the second part of their question was, they could check on your organization's website, either of your organization's websites for more information. But I thought that was a really great question for someone to ask. They want to help within their community, even if they're not an educator. And even though we don't have that, we don't have that bill yet, but we do have a lot of great resources within our state.
Yeah, and there's Reading Aloud is that other organization that I talked about, ALOUD. They actually give scholarships for non-teachers to get trained, and they provide these free, and they don't give everyone scholarships, but they have scholarships available. They're often looking to train people to provide virtual tutoring. And then there's another, it's not an organization, our colleague Jackie Gabali, who's a professor at St. Joe's University, is using something called Reading Ready, which if any teachers are listening, Jen, I love this. It is a free curriculum for emergent readers, and it's K-2. So if you have a struggling reader, it's completely evidence-based. It's from a woman named Katie Pace Miles. We can give you more resources. It's amazing for schools who are making a transition to put into intervention instead of trying to work so hard to figure out different interventions to do. And it is, again, free. It can be delivered by non-educators. The research behind it was with, I believe, just volunteers doing it in New York City. And it does have training that you can, districts, admin, principals, et cetera, can get for their teachers online, or volunteers or paraprofessionals at very low cost. And if anyone's interested in that, I can, reach out to my emails here Again, please forgive me if it takes a while and if you, just because it's a crazy time of year, but Reading Ready, my dream is to have National Honor Society students doing reading aloud tutoring after school, with struggling readers. But we just don't have the capacity. So,
If only you were in the West, because I could use some of them in my own classroom, just saying.
But again, I really appreciate this. I have some kids looking at me on the other side of the screen. So I'm going to hop, and I apologize, but I just have to make sure that no one starts screaming.
Well, let me just say thank you very much for coming. We very much appreciate this. And there is a lot in there. And we're grateful that we will have access to the recording to go over it again.
Yeah, and I will just say it took me 10 years to understand what I understand. I only
Yeah.
understand a little bit of it. Like, it is just a lot. And teachers, if there are teachers listening, Patton has amazing resources. There's a literacy symposium coming up that's virtual that you must attend. Ask for the day off if you still are in school. You should get it off to watch it. Is it 3 days? It's 3 days. There is also a an adolescent Patton symposium that I mean, Patton symposiums are like top notch. It's so much that they're like world known, which is crazy. Like they have people from dozens of countries attending them. But the adolescent one is in May, maybe May 29th. You can still register. It's like $30 or something. They used to be completely free, but I think they want to make sure everyone's coming. So if there are admin on board or board members, send some teachers to the Patton conference in Harrisburg. You will not regret it. It's a
They have some
very-
amazing speakers. Dr.
Yeah.
Archer's coming.
Yep. So again, thank you, everyone. I'm going to hop off. I just appreciate it. And please reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Kate. For everybody else, if anybody's on for just a second, our next social event for the Special Education Alliance will be May 19th for Myth Acton families at Eagleville Elementary School. We have our final SEA home and school meeting of the year coming up May 22nd. And then we have our ongoing Reading Phil's fundraiser running that you can find the flyer on Facebook, or you can Stella at your school and buy your tickets there. So click on the evaluation link to let us know what you thought of the presentation. And that's it. Good night.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank
Yes,
you for
thank you,
having me.
Jen.
I was looking to see if I could find that middle school one in case someone was looking for it.